Hello, my name is David Dowling, and I am a professional mediator, and I'm also adjunct faculty at the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine School of Law. My area of specialty is mediation, dispute resolution, and negotiation, and I have a passion for all things in peacemaking. Just a quick note before we begin. One of the things you might pick up on is I have a slight accent. I'm actually originally from Dublin, Ireland, and I only point that out because I might pronounce a couple of things a little funny or a little strange. But today, in this session, I'm going to be talking about civility and the law and incorporating the talk from last General Conference by President Nelson about Peacemakers Needed. So we're going to touch on an understanding of civility. We're going to look at some core values of civility. That includes respect, professionalism, collaboration, empathy. And then finally, I'm going to give some practical tips for enhancing civility in our professional experience. So parts of this talk are directed at attorneys, but I really think that the message behind everything that I'm going to share with you is applicable to all the different aspects of our professional and personal life. In the last General Conference, President Russell M. Nelson, the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he shared that vulgarity, fault-finding, and evil speaking of others are all too common. Too many pundits, politicians, entertainers, and other influencers throw insults constantly. I'm greatly concerned that so many people seem to believe that it is completely acceptable to condemn, malign, and vilify anyone who does not agree with them. Many seem eager to damage another's reputation with pathetic and pithy barbs. I thought this was such an interesting quote when I heard him talking about it. This idea that he has this concern for the way in which people feel it's acceptable to condemn, malign, and go after other people's reputations. The fact that he says people are eager to damage other people's reputations. It made me think about what we're seeing around us. Every day in my job, I engage with people who are in conflict, and I encounter people in conflict. And what I've come to realize is that we've developed this culture of conflict. We have similarities between us as a society, as people. There are so many things that pull us together, and we can see this in life. There are things that I like, things that you like. There are things that we enjoy. There are things that I think are fascinating and interesting. There are attributes, there are traits about me. When I introduce myself to people and I say to them, I'm from Ireland, more often than not, I'm quite surprised when people say, I have Irish ancestry. And those are similarities. In life, we also have differences. There are a lot of things that are different between us. There are things about my culture, my background, my socioeconomic background, my viewpoint of the world that are quite different from how you view the world, how you navigate the world, how you view your experience going through that world or the world that we live in. Unfortunately, what we seem to be doing is focusing on this gap that exists between our similarities and our differences. And we seem to feel that it's getting bigger and bigger. What we're doing is we become more and more aware of the differences between all of us around us. And so what we've come to experience is, as you see this graph on the PowerPoint, is that we feel that our differences are greater than our similarities with other people. Every day when I open up the newspaper, when I look online, when I open social media, when I turn on the TV, what I see and encounter more and more are encounters or differences that people are highlighting in the world around them. It's fascinating. You open up a meme and it's somebody shouting at somebody else. It's somebody attacking somebody. We've come up with coined phrases and terms, people caught at their worst moments. And it's becoming more and more obvious. And because of our devices, because of things like our cell phones, we're capturing these moments and we're sharing them with all of those around us. So now what we're doing is we're more aware of the differences. And I think especially coming out of something like COVID, that really created this divide in the world. And what that's resulted in is defensiveness. when we feel that there are differences there, when we recognize those differences more than we do the similarities, what we come to feel is more and more defensive. We want to protect ourselves and we want to throw up walls. We use social media, we use all of these tools at our disposal to point out to people the differences between us and others. We go in, we write messages. It's fascinating. I think it's always just so unusual when you look back, not that long ago, if I didn't like you, if I had an issue with you, if I was angry with you or upset with you, I could tell the people in my circle. I could go to my colleagues, I could go to my neighbors, I would have a chat over the fence with my next door neighbor and say, hey, this person's frustrating me, this person's upsetting me. Today, we have the world at our fingertips. We have social media accounts with hundreds of followers, hundreds or thousands of friends. Do we really know all of these people? However, when I feel angry or upset with you, I can go to this platform and share these things. I can tell the world how I'm angry and upset with you, with the things that you're doing, with the approach that you've taken in life. And so what that results in, as it says here, is this defensiveness. We attack each other. We go after each other. And so this becomes this culture of conflict. And I say mind the gap because we have to be aware of that gap in there. When I teach and talk about mediation, conflict, and dispute resolution, I talk about interests, so our underlying interests. And what's fascinating is with interests is that interests are often similar, right? We have shared interests. When I sit down with people in conflict and in mediation, more often than not, I'm quite surprised how shared their interests are. Interests are often complementary. They might not be completely aligned, but they do line up to some degree. And very rarely are they antagonistic. Rarely is there tension there in those interests. However, we are so unwilling to see that. So we focus on those differences, and what results is that conflict and this culture of conflict that we are living in. A pilot, American Airlines pilot, recently went viral because of what he did. He made that announcement. You know, when you're boarding the plane, we all get on the plane, we sit down, the pilot comes on and says, hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain from the cockpit. Just to let you know, we're going to be heading in this direction. The weather's going to be like this. Sit back and relax. We're going to hand you over to the crew, or the cabin crew, who will take care of you during the flight. And so this captain, this pilot, his message was a little bit different, and I wanted to share some of that with you. So he says, be nice to each other. The pilot continued, be respectful to each other. I shouldn't have to say that. You people should treat people the way you want to be treated. But I have to say it every single flight because people do not. And they're selfish and rude, and we won't have it. It's fascinating, right? Because in the world, when you think about traveling, we get excited, we pay a lot of money, we get on this plane, we're traveling to and from. But now we're getting constant reports of people being dragged off planes, people yelling and shouting. There's memes, there's videos of it. This bad behavior that exists in the skies, that people encounter. We go to airports and people are angry, and I've been angry at an airport. When I was traveling home to Ireland one time, we got to the airport and they told us, actually, we're not putting you on this flight. The flight is full. And we said, well, we've got tickets. And they said, yeah, that doesn't matter. Unfortunately, we're not able to put you on this flight. I was there. I had 4 kids. My youngest one was 5. And we said, okay, well, put us on the next flight. And they said, well, there's no other flights that we can put you on. And we stayed at the airport for 12 hours. LAX, not a great airport. We were there for 12 hours. And it was a long day. It was exhausting. My kids were tired. My kids were exhausted. We finally got on a flight and started our journey home. And I was frustrated and I was angry. But I didn't see it as anybody's fault. I knew that things had conspired against us. Things were working against us. But I didn't get on that flight and turn that anger and frustration that I may have been feeling to anybody else. But as a society, as a world, we feel that that's what we're able to do now, is that I'm able to look at you and you're the reason that things aren't going the way I want them to go. And so it's fascinating that I thought that this pilot felt the need to get on and announce to the passengers on his plane, we're not going to take it. We will not allow you to be disrespectful to us and to the crew on this plane. And we're not going to have it. And it's interesting. He said people should be treated the way they want to be treated. But he has to repeat this message time and time again. Now, the Utah standards of professionalism and civility for attorneys. So I work with lawyers, and there's several different rules or elements to the professional and civility rules. And I'm going to pull out 3 key elements of that. So first of all, it says lawyers shall advance the legitimate interests of their clients without reflecting any ill will that clients may have for their adversaries, even if called upon to do so by another. So you should advance the legitimate interests of your clients without reflecting any ill will that clients may have for the adversaries. Clients come to see attorneys, people come to see attorneys because they're in conflict, typically. They're angry, they're frustrated, they feel that they've been wronged. I deal with it all the time in mediation. People come to me, they're so frustrated, they're so upset with what's happening. And what's fascinating is how attorneys, how lawyers can take up that frustration. We encourage them, I teach lawyers, I teach law students, to zealously advocate for your clients. That's wonderful. We want you to get in there. We want you to sit down. We want you to say, this is important to my client. This is something that my client feels strongly about. However, how you do that can shape and influence how everybody goes through the journey and experience of litigation. Lawyers do not need to come in and reflect, as it says here, the ill will or the anger that their clients have in this particular situation. So let's continue. Lawyers shall advise their clients that civility, courtesy, and fair dealing are expected. They are tools for effective advocacy and not signs of weakness. So I love this as a mediator, right? So advising clients in advance of the process that civility, courtesy, and fair dealing are expected. And these are tools for effective advocacy and not signs of weakness. Think about this, signs of weakness. Oftentimes, when I talk to students about and people about mediation, they'll say to me, well, mediation, does that mean that you're giving up, that you've encountered a problem, that you're going to settle? And that's simply not true. At some point along this journey, no matter what the conflict is we have with other people, and as I said, I'm talking here about legal situations, but think about family situations. A lot of times legal conflict ends up in the courtroom, but it starts somewhere. It has its beginning somewhere. And I've seen many, many situations. I do family and divorce mediations. I do probate cases where that conflict and that tension started early on. And because somebody wouldn't recognize how to be civil, how to be courteous, how to communicate more effectively with other people that they felt that they were in conflict with, now what it does is it results in that defensiveness. And because we're both feeling defensive, we escalate the conflict. So the defensiveness results itself in an escalation of conflict that occurs between everybody. So here, what the Utah Standards of Professionalism and Civility is saying, that as an attorney, as a lawyer, you should let your clients know, you should let the people know that you're working with, that civility, courtesy, and fair dealing is expected in this process. It's part of what we do. In business, when you're dealing with other people, you're going to negotiate. You're going to encounter negotiations where things are going to be difficult. Think about how you deal with other people and think about the message that you're sending to those that you work with. How can you engage your employees, the folks that you work with, in letting them know that when we deal with other people, that we deal with them fairly, that we treat them with respect? And finally, lawyers should avoid hostile, demeaning, or humiliating words in written and oral communications with their adversaries. In communicating with others, as I said, because we're behind our screens, because we have these devices that we can hide behind, we feel much more emboldened to say things that are negative, that are vulgar, that are inappropriate. We feel that we can share these things that we wouldn't say in front of other people. A long time ago, there was a saying that if you wouldn't say it in front of your parents, you probably shouldn't say it at all. Well, we don't have to say it because we can write it down. We can write it in an email. We can send it in a message. We can put it on somebody's post. We can make a post about it ourselves. But I love this language here. Avoid hostile, demeaning, and humiliating words. How can we incorporate that into who we are? How can we consider about how we communicate with others? Lawyers in this community are constantly engaged in conflict. They're representing parties who are engaged in conflict. And so when we engage in conflict, we think about hostile behaviors. We think about retaliatory behaviors. However, can we conduct and can we do that business without demeaning and humiliating others? Well, clearly we can. There is a way to do that. However, in this culture of conflict, we feel that it is now commonplace and acceptable. There's been this shift away from boarding a plane, sitting respectfully, saying thank you, getting off, and moving on. Yeah, some passenger might be rude. Somebody might not give you the thing that you're asking for. You might get a soda spilled on you. You would sort yourself out and you would move on. Today, what we feel is that we can be angry, we can yell, we can shout, we can engage in conflict. So these are just three pieces or three elements of the rules for professionalism and civility. So what I'd like to do now is look at some of the core values of civility. And so I outlined 4 at the top of the presentation. So let's begin with professionalism. Professionalism means, I guess, different things for different people. I remember one time I was in court to mediate a case, and an attorney came in. Excuse me. He came in and his shirt was untucked. And sticking out of his jacket pocket was a soda bottle, quite noticeably. And he walked up and he slung his bag down on the counter, and he stood there in front of the judge and pleaded for his client in a certain thing. And as I sat there, I was behind, waiting for a case to go to mediation. As I sat there, I started to watch and notice everybody in the courtroom, from the clerk to the judge to the deputy in there, and watch how they looked at this attorney, how they looked at his presentation, his demeanor, how he engaged with them. And as I sat there, I realized that, the way in which he presented himself reflected how he did his job to them. As they encountered him, soda bottle, shirt untucked, they looked at him and thought, this is the kind of professional, this is the kind of attorney that he is. We don't have to go into every setting with the tie, with the jacket, and the full getup. But we can think about how we represent ourselves, how we engage with others. Being a professional, for me, means turning up on time. And I've heard this many times. There are 2 kinds of people in the world: the people who turn up late and the people who turn up early. So being on time, usually I'm early. So I get there before so that I can be on time. I have some friends who being on time means that they try to get there for that exact time and they end up being late. When I teach my students, what I try to help them to understand is, when you're turning in a paper for me and the assignment says it's due at 11:59 p.m., you need to submit it at 11:59 p.m. When they submit it late, they'll come back to me and go, Professor Dowling, I'm sorry, these things happened. And I say, yes, but this is a professional environment. And if you were submitting paperwork to a court, if you were submitting an application, if you were submitting a college application, scholarship application, whatever it might be, if there's a deadline, the deadline is firm, and you don't get to come back and say, I'm sorry, that's the moment that my internet decided to die. So submit things early. If you think you're going to have a problem, always be early. And so thinking about how we engage other people and how we communicate with other people and the messages that we send, from the soda bottle, the untucked shirt, to punctuality, professionalism matters. And it says a lot about who we are and how much respect that we have for others. I did a program for several years where I worked with incarcerated minors at a juvenile hall facility. I worked there for about 5 years. I was teaching full time, and I would take law students in with me. And each week we went in and we sat down with about 6 to 10 incarcerated youth. They were aged from about 11 to 19 years old, some incarcerated for maybe a couple of months, others for many, many years for very severe crimes. These young people were in a facility, stripped down concrete walls, concrete benches, room with bunks piled up, and that's where they slept. They had little to nothing, very little, if anything at all. When I encountered them, when I worked with them, something that I learned from them time and time again is how important respect was to them. It is the only thing that they had. So if I demonstrated respect for them, they would demonstrate respect for me. It was fascinating because I learned a lot about how to communicate respect from my body language, my eye contact, how I approached them, my willingness to feel comfortable with them in their presence, sitting down, engaging with them, making that positive eye contact and leaning in conversations. That demonstrated to them that I felt comfortable and I respected them. And when I treated them with respect, every time they treated me with respect, they reciprocated. And when we are in a professional setting, we want people to engage with us in a respectful way. And so we have to think about, what am I doing to demonstrate respect for this situation, for this person, for this encounter? Because if I'm able to demonstrate that through my words, am I coming in using words that are appropriate? Am I coming in demonstrating through my tone of voice, my pace of voice, my eye contact? If you're working with me and you come up and you're like, hey, David, I want to talk to you about being a mediator. And I'm like, yeah, okay, so what do you want to do? You want me to mediate your case? Let me look at my calendar and I'll figure it out. Would you feel respected? And I do the exaggerated body language because when we worked with these youth, they would approach staff in the facility and they would come back and say, this staff member hates me. They're so rude. And every time I go talk to them, and I'd say, well, let's role play. Let's demonstrate how you communicate with them. And I have teenagers. I have 4 kids, 3 teenage boys. And if you have teenagers in your life, if you work with teenagers, you know that it's oftentimes tough for them to make good eye contact. More often than not, they have a device in their hand, so their eyes are on this. If you're talking with them, they're not looking at you, and they're kind of slouching, and they're emoting frustration, no matter what you say. Even if you say, hey, that sounds good, I'm willing to work with you on that. Oh, so you're not saying yes. And so I would talk with these youth, and I'd say, okay, let's think about this. If I came up to you and asked you for something, and I said, oh, would you feel respected? And they'd say, no. And then I would model for them. If I come up to you and I say, excuse me, could you help me with this? And I use appropriate, respectful language. Now, do you feel respected? And every time they would say yes. So respect is important, and I learned a lot. There's so much we can learn about respect from those around us. And I think the most important lessons that I learned about respect was from this population in juvenile hall. Collaboration. As a mediator, collaborating is such a fun thing. Working with others to help them see a way through conflict. We so often think that I can do this by myself. I can figure this out. I know the answers. I can come up with the solution, the resolution. But it's amazing to me how when you put a group of people together, whether it's in a business setting, in a family setting, in a legal setting, how many people could have a creative thought on how to resolve a conflict, how to work through a problem or a challenge. And when we engage, when we allow other people to share their thoughts, when we create a safe space for people to open up, and explore ideas with us instead of knocking them down. And I've seen this. I've seen it where somebody, especially a youth, right? Somebody young, and they say, hey, I thought about this, and somebody dismisses it. Be welcoming of other thoughts, of other ideas. Even when they challenge you, be inviting of those ideas. Seek for opportunities to collaborate. Even people whose political worldview, socioeconomic experience is vastly different than yours, there are so many opportunities to collaborate with people in ways that can benefit and engage us. And then empathy. When I watch these memes, these clips, these videos, we've coined names for individuals, Karens, right? We experience Karens out there today. And what occurs to me, and granted I know that there are some people out there who maybe are just not nice people to encounter, but these video clips are taken at a certain point in a conversation. And at what point did somebody transition from trying to be respectful, trying to communicate, to feeling frustrated, to feeling angry, to feeling pushed into a situation in which they reacted, they were not themselves? So when I see these videos, what I try to do is have some empathy and understanding. When I encounter somebody in a conflict situation, I try to think about what they must be going through, what they must be experiencing, that if they're this upset, if they're frustrated, when I sit in a mediation, I'm very aware that people are going to yell and shout and use strong language, but I try to have empathy and understanding for who they are and the experiences that have brought them to this place. A lot of times people have stories. Invite them to share their stories. Engage with them. Ask them. Try to understand who they are and where they're coming from. Allowing for empathy in conflict can change your perspective on those that you're working with. In a legal setting, we think about it for other clients, other attorneys, and even the court. I want you to take these concepts and apply it to family, friends, and work associates. How can we incorporate these core elements of civility, professionalism, respect, collaboration, and empathy into who we are? We see these terms. I teach the concept of active listening. So if you don't know about active listening, go away, look it up. It's kind of fun. And I say to people, active listening. I did a training actually with the staff at the juvenile hall facility. I went in one day, I did this whole training, and I'm up there doing my thing like this, and I'm talking about active listening. And as I looked out, they were kind of rolling their eyes. I said, okay, stop. What's going on here? And they said, well, Mr. Dowling, we've heard a lot about active listening this week. We get it. Listen, be attentive, show empathy, show respect. I'm like, whoa, okay, we're good. Let's do a little role play. Let's have a little fun. And I sent them off and I gave them a little role play to engage in. And they all got excited and they did this negotiation and they came back and they were like, we got the best outcome, and they put the results on the board. And as they did so, and as I explored the outcome of this particular negotiation that I'd shared with them, what we had the opportunity to discover was that nobody actually engaged in active listening. Nobody asked questions. Nobody paused. Nobody cared to think about, are there clarifying questions? What else should I understand here? And they'd missed key facts in the negotiation that they were doing. So why do I share this? Well, because we say, oh, I know about professionalism. I know about respect. I know about empathy, please. I know about collaboration. It's one thing to know about these concepts, but are we assimilating them into who we are? Are we incorporating them in how we navigate our space, how we deal with others on a daily basis? I had a student one time that said to me, I didn't do this assignment. And I said, okay. I said, well, would you say that to an employer? And he said, well, that's a professional world. I said, well, your professional life starts here in law school. So we shouldn't say, I'm going to treat others respectfully in work, but not at home. I'm going to be collaborative with my friends, but not with my colleagues or not with my family. I can have empathy for my family, but I'm not going to have empathy for those that I work with or those that I engage with on a daily basis or that I encounter on a flight. So think about how you can incorporate these core values of civility into your daily life. Continuing with another quote from President Russell M. Nelson, "Anger never persuades, hostility builds no one. Contention never leads to inspired solutions." I love this, right? So anger never persuades. Think about the last time you were involved in a conflict. Now, if you have a roommate, a spouse, children, parents, siblings, colleagues, it shouldn't take you long to think about the last time you were engaged in conflict, right? We all have conflict. Conflict is part of life. Now think about when that person was angry with you. How persuaded were you to listen to them? How persuaded were you to engage and want to work with them? When somebody's yelling at me, when somebody's hostile, I don't feel connected. And I love that. Hostility builds no one. Contention never leads to inspired solutions. When there's that contention, it drives out, in our community, it drives out the spirit. It drives out the opportunity to create an environment in which people want to work together. Think about those moments where you have felt that, where you felt connected to others, where you felt engaged, where you felt inspired. You want to work with these people. You want to collaborate. You want to build important relationships of trust. However, that anger, that hostility, and that contention, they remove that experience. They prevent us from engaging, collaborating, and working with others. So let's think about some practical tips for enhancing civility. So, model civility and professionalism. And I've touched on this a little bit. When we are in a setting, we have the ability to model how we want others to behave. When I'm mediating cases, what I'll often do is I use my eye contact, my body language, my tone, and pace of my voice to help other people in conflict. So people will come in and they'll be like, I am so angry. I'm so frustrated. And this, I did a mediation recently, and this gentleman was, it was actually a Zoom mediation, and he was very, very angry. And he was like, oh, and seething, just so angry and so upset. And I understand that. This is a conflict that has been building over many, many years. And so there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of anger, and we need some way to let that out. So what I'm able to do is think about, in response to how he's communicating with me, I can take my voice and I can bring my tone down to a warmer place. And then I can slow down a little and communicate directly and say, I hear you. Help me to understand what's going on. Help me to think through what's going on here. What ideas or solutions do you have for finding a resolution here? I look directly. I lean in. I engage in a way that invites him. And it's hard for us. When somebody's angry and upset, it's hard for them, when you're calm, to remain angry and upset. So think about ways in which you can model that professionalism and civility. So that respect, that empathy, and collaboration. It's easy to go into a situation, easy to go into a negotiation, any kind of conversation that you're having with somebody and say, they don't want to collaborate with me, but you're not being very collaborative. They don't want to engage. They don't want to work with me. What are you sending to them? What are you sending out? How are you communicating with them? What are you demonstrating to them about who you are and how you want to work with them? So think about the messages that you're sending before you start evaluating the messages that you're receiving. We pick up on these messages that we're receiving and we say, oh, this is how you want to behave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reciprocate. I'm going to retaliate. I'm going to defend. I'm going to escalate the conflict. And what we have an opportunity to do is calm things down. And why? Why does it make a difference? Well, when we're in, whether it's a family discussion and negotiation or it's a legal setting, if that tension rises, if the conflict escalates, what we're going to do is walk away from the table. And when we walk away from the table, we walk away from opportunities to resolve, to find some kind of an agreement, and to find that peace that we all want in our lives. Identify opportunities to resolve conflict. In every setting, as I said, whether it's a family setting at home or it's in court, there are different ways in which we can resolve conflict. And going back to that idea of being collaborative, it's fascinating to me, as I've said before, how we have so many different viewpoints and ideas at the table. But oftentimes we close ourselves down and we prevent ourselves from hearing what other people have to say, instead of opening ourselves up. In mediation, there's a technique called brainstorming, and I'll use this with clients. And I'll bring them in and they'll be sitting there opposite of each other, feeling that tension. And I'll say, okay, you both are very anchored in your positions. You both feel very angry and justified in what you're asking for today. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little brainstorming. And I give each one a piece of paper and a pen. And I say, what I want you to do is I want you to write down the 10 things that you want. And I want you to write down 10 things that you want. I didn't come up with this. This is something that I've seen done and I love to use. So each person will start writing down their 10 things. What's always unusual and fun to watch is that I think by about number 8, they get a little stuck. By 9, they're trying to come up with something. So I just write it all down. So here's what happens. Number 1 thing on my list is I want the moon. Number 2, I want the stars. Number 3, and it's I want. And by number 4, it's like, I'd like this. And number 5 is like, I'd be happy with this. This would be great. Number 6 is like, I think we can all agree on this. And then I have the other person share. And same thing, I want the moon, I want the stars. And by 4, 5, 6, and 7, there's so much overlap. It's where those interests that I talked about, where they're shared, where they're complementary. And it's hard to see those interests, that they're shared and complementary. All we can see is that they're antagonistic when we start out. We see that we're on opposite ends of a spectrum and that there's no way that we could ever find common ground. And by asking people to engage in writing out a list of 10 things, as silly and as difficult as it sometimes feels for people, what it does is it allows them to move to a place where they can find that common ground. So looking for opportunities to resolve conflict, it's all around you. Be patient. There are 2 traits that I think every mediator should have, and so I want you to have those 2. 1, patience. Okay? I don't know how many times I've gone into a situation of conflict where people have been like, this is never going to work its way out. And I say, okay, let's see what's going to happen today. And I'm calm and I'm patient and I give it some time. And I allow people to be angry and be frustrated and then find that opportunity to move them to that common ground so that they can start to work together, they can collaborate, they can start to engage with each other in a healthy way that allows them to see opportunities for resolution. And it's kind of fun. So the second thing, patience, optimism. And I think we're short on optimism today in a lot of ways. We feel like, the world, all this negativity. And all it takes is you to be that one spark of optimism in a room. To just realize that there is always a way to find a resolution. There's always a way to find an answer. There's always a way to bring people together, to engage them in healthy communication, to engage them in a collaborative environment, to create a space for them to work together. And I love it. Now, a cheap trick that I use, and I don't recommend that you do this, is I lay the accent on a little thicker. So when people are especially difficult to work with, suddenly the accent starts getting a little more silly and a little more leprechaun sounding, and that disarms them. And you'd be surprised how quickly that can work. All right. So what should we do in difficult conversations or negotiations? So let's take a look at some more practical steps here. So take a break or step away from the table. So if it's a legal setting, if it's a negotiation where you're sitting there working with people, if you're in a situation with a family member, with a friend, and things just feel tense, things feel like they're not going to work out, if you're feeling that spark of optimism fade, pause. Let's take a break. Let's step away from the table. Go step outside, breathe some fresh air, whatever it might take. Maybe continue your meeting out for another day. But oftentimes taking a break, stepping away from the table, recharging, renewing ourselves, reconsidering what we're doing and our approach in this conversation allows us to come back and re-engage. So when it seems like it's not possible, step away and think about ways that you can come back and re-engage in a healthy dialogue. Encourage respect. If you're feeling that the person that you're working with, if you feel like the person that you're engaged with is not being respectful, then what are you doing to encourage and reciprocate that respect? What are you doing? How are you, the youth in juvenile hall, how are you teaching David that respect is important? So in everything that they did, they taught me about how important respect was. From the silliest of actions that they engaged in, it told them, you respect me or you don't respect me. So how are we demonstrating and encouraging and engaging in a respectful way that we want other people to work with us? Become a peacemaker. I love this because whether you're an attorney and you're in litigation and you've got an attorney on the other side and you think, well, how can I be the peacemaker? I'm advocating for my client. These are my client's rights and interests. You can shift from that side of the table to the middle and become the person who facilitates, who opens up the line of communication and becomes a peacemaker. When we're engaged in family conflict, when we're engaged in conflict with others in some way, obviously read the room, understand who's present, understand the emotions and tensions that are there, but embrace those peacemaker qualities, embrace those Christ-like attributes. Patience, optimism, loving. It's kind of amazing to be in that role as a peacemaker. It's something that I'm grateful for, that I've had this opportunity in my career to do, because I can see people shift and change and move away from being anchored in this conflict to seeing hope, to seeing possibilities, to seeing an outcome that is something that they feel that they've had a voice in shaping and a part of. Ask questions to gain understanding. So when it feels like you're in a conversation where somebody is just not willing to work with you, you think, okay, David said, be patient. I've been patient. Be optimistic. I've been sunny. I've been optimistic. I'm good with this. It's still not happening. Ask questions. Help me to understand why you feel this way. Is there something that I'm missing? Is there something that I should know? You seem frustrated. You seem upset. What's going on here? A couple of months ago, I was driving I had a meeting and I had to be on the other side, and I'm in Southern California, and I was probably about an hour and a half drive from Malibu, where I was going to be teaching class. And I got in my car, and it was just that time. It's kind of funny because in Southern California, what a drive that should take an hour, suddenly it took 3.5 hours. And as I approached that drive, I just was feeling so angry and so frustrated and so upset with everything that was going on in that drive in that moment that I had to think about how I was going to approach my class, because I could come in holding on to this tension, this anger, and this frustration. And I didn't want to do that. That's not how I wanted to engage with others. Because what you have to understand is that a lot of times what we're encountering, it's not personal. It's not about you. Had I gotten out of that car ride and gone into my house, it would have been easy for me to engage in conflict with my wife. It would have been easy for me to suddenly have this out of nowhere argument that would have come about with one of my kids, whatever it might have been. But it wouldn't have been about them. It would have been about how I felt having been sitting for 3.5 hours in a car. How many people do we encounter that they're having a bad day? Things aren't going their way. Something else is weighing on their mind. They're sad about a situation. They're not feeling valued. They're not feeling appreciated in life. And then we meet them, we encounter them, we work with them. And we feel that their attitude is directed at us. And suddenly that conflict arises out of nowhere. So more often than not, try to remember, it probably has nothing to do with you at all. All right. I love this quote from Abraham Lincoln, and he says, "Discourage litigation. Persuade your neighbors to compromise whenever you can. Point out to them how the nominal winner is often the real loser in fees, expenses, and waste of time. As a peacemaker, the lawyer has a superior opportunity of being a good man. There will still be business enough." So when you think about how old this quote is, right, from Abraham Lincoln, and what he's telling you here, persuade your neighbors to compromise whenever you can. So this is obviously directed at the legal community. Point out to them how the nominal winner is often the real loser. So even though we feel like we win, when I'm working with people, I say to them, look, I'm a mediator. I don't litigate. But litigation, I equate it to a marathon. If you've ever run a marathon, I don't look like it, but I've done a few in my time. And in a marathon, when you start out at that start line at mile 1, you feel great. You just think to yourself, I got this. I'm going to do great. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be so much fun. I'm going to run. I'm going to get a killer time. I'm going to crack Boston. At about 7 miles, you're like, I feel strong. I feel good. By about mile 14, you start to think to yourself, hang on a second. I have another 12.2 miles to go, and my legs are dying. My first marathon, which was in St. George, I remember about mile 21, the wheels completely came off, and I was struggling to move forward. So how does this compare to litigation? Well, when we start that process, when we start down in conflict, we feel confident. We feel like we've got the upper hand. We know we're going to win. About halfway in, about mile 14, we start to think to ourselves, is this ever going to end? Because sometimes litigation can take years. It's expensive. It's physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially draining. So while we might get to the end of that process and a judge might say, you win, they lose, are you truly the winner? So I love it here. As a peacemaker, a lawyer has a superior opportunity of being a good man. There will still be business enough for everyone. So think about that in your interactions with others. As attorneys and leaders, you can contribute to either promoting peace or perpetuating conflict. The choice is yours. It really is up to you what you want to do. And I'm going to share one last quote from President Nelson's conference talk in April of 23. Contention is a choice. Peacemaking is a choice. You have your agency to choose contention or reconciliation. I urge you to choose to be a peacemaker now and always. And I would like to echo the sentiments of the prophet in saying that contention is a choice. We can choose to be offended. We can choose to be angry. We can choose to feel upset with the things that are going on around us. Or we can choose to be a peacemaker. I urge you to choose to be a peacemaker. Find opportunities to be patient, to be optimistic, to engage, to encourage, to collaborate with others. Find opportunities to build people up rather than tearing them down. You have a gift, and that gift is knowledge. And with that knowledge and understanding, in thinking about your role and who you can be, you can make a difference. So, as it says here, as the prophet said, you have a choice on how you can approach conflict and how you can approach other people. So when we think about this culture of conflict, when we think about this divide, this gap that exists, as we enter into different stages of life, as we think about politics, as we think about family, as we think about work, we can choose to work with others. We can choose to be the peacemaker. And it is my hope and prayer that as you listen to this, you can think about ways in which you can engage with others in a meaningful way and build them up and find ways to help people find resolution. Thank you.